I hope you packed your bags. Today on the Roundhouse, we are taking a trip aboard a Pennsylvania Railroad observation car on the Pennsylvania Railroad main line. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to The Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode number 49 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it. Today's episode, I'm taking you on a trip. We are going to be riding the Alexander Hamilton, a former Pennsylvania Railroad observation car from New York to Pittsburgh aboard the Steel City Limited, courtesy of Luxury Rail Travel, who were kind enough to invite us to cover this on behalf of the American Steam Railroad. This trip was a fundraiser for the Fire Up 2100 campaign to get their steam locomotive operational. So, I hope you enjoy the trip, because here we are at Penn Station in New York City. The adventure begins. I'm currently standing inside the empty lounge section of the Alexander Hamilton. We're in New York Penn Station on track 12, waiting for departure. What's exciting about this section is that we're going to be going at speeds of up to 110 miles per hour. Now, this car, when it was in service for the Pennsylvania Railroad, probably topped out at about 100 behind the likes of GG1 electric locomotives. So we're going to be going even faster than that. I am here with Rob Gardner. He's the fundraising chairman for American Steam Railroad. We are sitting in the Alexander Hamilton, cruising along at a comfortable 110 miles an hour. How are you doing today, Rob?
Doing very good. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing excellent. It is such a different experience riding in this car on the Northeast Corridor. I've done this trip half dozen times before, but this is very different for me. How about for you?
This is definitely an exciting, eye-opening experience to move it at this rate of speed on the rails. It's pretty cool.
So let's set the tone for today. Why are we here? What is the purpose of this trip?
Well, American Steam Railroading, we're in the midst of restoring the Reading T1 number 2100, getting her back in operation. Today's trip is it's a 2-day fundraiser event. We'll be boarding 30 passengers in Harrisburg for a run over the old Pennsylvania Railroad Middle Division to Pittsburgh on Saturday. We'll be overnighting Saturday night, and we'll be riding back to Philly tomorrow. And all the proceeds from the event are going towards the restoration of 2100 to get her back in service.
And I was impressed because by the time I had been contacted by Russ Swinnerton about this trip, the tickets had already sold out. So that shows that there's a lot of interest for the trip in general, but also for what this trip is for, your restoration. And I think it's really good that people are recognizing that.
Definitely agree. It was really something to see the rate at which the tickets sold, and we're looking forward to repeating this, probably the same trip, and we've got a couple other trips we're looking at rolling out in the next few months. So stay tuned to our website to see what exciting destinations we're looking at for the next trip with ASR.
And looking forward at what we can expect from today and tomorrow, what are you most excited about? What has been in your mind the most about this trip?
Well, we're on a Pennsylvania Railroad private car, the Alexander Hamilton. We're going to be riding on the original Pennsylvania Railroad, the standard railroad of the world, from Philadelphia to Harrisburg, hitting all the key towns that built the Pennsylvania Railroad back in the early part of the 20th century. We'll be going through places like Johnstown, Altoona, making our way to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh being the steel capital of the U.S. in a lot of people's minds. And so it's really a step back in time to what travel was like in the 40s. You know, the golden age of American railroading, which, you know, we hope to touch on that when we get the 2100 back in service, to be pulling special excursion trains throughout the eastern United States, giving people a glimpse as to what the golden age of railroading was like in America.
Where is the restoration with the 2100 at right now? And what is the likely project with that today's funds are going to go towards, or have they already gone towards something with the project?
Well, the key tasks that are ahead of us right now, we're literally within days of doing an initial hydro on the boiler. The boiler is certified. We're going kind of back a couple steps just to satisfy ourselves that there are no issues hiding with the locomotive. Once we do the initial hydro, we'll look at a test fire. Another milestone within the next probably 60 days will be a trip to St. Thomas, Ontario to retrieve the stoker mechanism, which has been sitting in St. Thomas since the 2100 was originally converted to oil 6, 7, 8 years ago. We've prepared the tender to remove the oil bunker. We've not lifted it out yet. So that's another big task we're looking forward to undertaking. So, you know, there are day-to-day costs, minor supplies that we need to purchase on a week-to-week basis. None of these tasks are really, really big, high-dollar ticket items, but you'd be surprised over the course of a month, 2 months, how much cash outlay you need to keep a light-running restoration like this moving forward. We have everything in Cleveland, Ohio at the Roundhouse for the hydro test, the preheater. You have to preheat the water over a certain amount of time to preheat the boiler before you pump the boiler up to the desired temperature and pressure you want to get it to. We've got a team assembled, and you know, over the next week or two, we hope to get this initial hydro out of the way. Whatever we find, we'll develop a plan of attack and a schedule, and go from there. You know, we're hoping sometime over this winter we might be able to put a fire in the firebox and actually boil water.
The key piece of what you said there is that quite a few of these projects are not, quote, high dollar items. And I think it's important that people recognize that even if they're making small $5, $10 donations, that can go a long way with each of these small individual projects that now become accessible because you have the funds to be able to execute them.
Definitely. If you feel you could only afford $5 to $10 a month, or whenever you had a spare $5 or $10, it's all useful, it's all appreciated. Our big fundraising campaign is the $21 a month for a year campaign. When you look at the things you may spend money on, ancillary, non-essentials, you know, most people, if you really look at your budget, $21 a month isn't that big a stretch, and our goal is to reach 3,000 subscribers to help not only fund the restoration, but we also need seed money to support the operations of the locomotive. When you go look at moving a locomotive from one railroad to another, there are a lot of expenses involved. Insurance policies are needed. While you can sell tickets, you do need cash up front to make things happen once it's time to actually put the locomotive in operation. Right now, we're not seeing any really major high dollar items, like I said before. We still haven't fully investigated all the wheel and bearing situations with the locomotive, the tender, and the auxiliary tender. We still may find some things that we're hiding under the radar. So, you know, we have a goal that's still in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we want to raise. Right now, we think that we can get the locomotive very, very close to operation with a lot of sweat equity. That is what we're working on right now.
What is your role as fundraising chairman? What is it that you do for the organization?
The last 12 months I've been actively involved in writing grant applications to different foundations and organizations. Prior to that, with my engineering background, one of my first tasks that I got involved with the 2100 project was assisting with the high and wide load calculations that were submitted to the Class 1 railroads, helping close out the deal, so to speak, with the Class 1 carriers to get the 2100 moved. We lifted the locomotive with a unified jacking system onto 3 heavy haul flat cars out in Washington State. A locomotive of this size on flat cars is a high and wide load. The railroads have standard procedures for reviewing and approving every load. So that was kind of cool that I kind of got involved at the tail end to help proofread and double check our calculations and verify what we were submitting to the railroad to make it a smooth application process. And so that was kind of neat to see that, and then watch the locomotive's journey across the country. It took about a month to get her to Cleveland. So right now my role is more of an administrative function, helping raise funds. And to anybody within the sound of my voice who feels that maybe they have talents and skills they're more comfortable with that don't involve getting their hands dirty, working on a locomotive or car project, reach out to us. People that have backgrounds in accounting, technical writing, any engineering functions. There's a lot of organizational skills that we need to have in place on our team. If you think you have a skill you'd like to offer up and you're not right in the Cleveland area, we live in a world of technology where you can do things remotely and still make a contribution to the project and be a part of the team. Reach out to us through Facebook, through our website, make contact with us. We'd love to hear from you. Any number of skill sets that are needed to help an organization like this run. We're looking for people right now that like putting together like newsletters and flyers to help with a little more of the publicity of keeping the world updated as to what we're doing. I do weekly, bi-weekly updates online on a few different railroad preservation type forums like RYPN and Train Orders and the Chasky Live Steam Forum. Keeping some of, I know a lot of our supporters are on those forums. It's fun. It does take some time. It takes me a half hour to 45 minutes to do the 3 updates I regularly do, but I enjoy helping write the work reports, putting the photographs online, and keeping people abreast of what we're doing. And if anybody has an interest in any of those areas, we're always looking for volunteers to help share the load. Many hands make light work.
You're looking toward the future too, which is everybody's watching the restoration, eager for when it hits the rails. But then there's the sustainability of the program, making sure that there's good relationships built up with the host railroads so that it has places to run, all of the FRA paperwork, and so much behind the scenes to keep the operation moving smoothly.
Definitely. It's key to develop the right relationships, develop good relationships, open, honest communication about your intentions, because it doesn't take much to hurt a relationship too. And when you're dealing with the level of regulatory oversight that you do operating on the general system, it's key that we have people in a lot of different places that are on board with what we're doing, that we're communicating, keeping them up to date with our progress, and that's all part of how this goes from a restoration project to an operating program, which we'll be developing, over the next, 6 to 12 months.
And the volunteer effort, it's so good to see how many people have been in support of this, lending their time to go down to the Roundhouse and put in the effort to see these projects through to completion as well.
We've got a great mix of talent and volunteers within the organization. We've got a great group of guys and gals from around Ohio that travel many hours to come to a work session. My hat is off to them. Myself, I don't live in Ohio. I live 10 hours away. I've not been able to be as actively involved with the Saturday work sessions, but it's very heartening to see the people that come out week after week, that travel 2, 3, 4 hours each way to come to a work session. It tells you that these machines, these steam locomotives, are still very relevant in the minds of a lot of Americans. While we see a lot of high-tech railroading today, it's really neat to see how many people still want to touch and feel American history like that, get their hands dirty, and know that they're putting their efforts into something really special and really cool to get a large mainline 484 back in operation. It doesn't happen all the time.
There's something funny about the fact that we're using electric power for a trip fundraising for a steam locomotive.
I call that poetic justice, I would say. It's all railroading is really interesting to me. So this is a neat day today and tomorrow.
Well, because for your day job as well, you work for a company called Railworks. What is the type of work that you do for your 9 to 5?
Railworks is a nationwide track contractor. We do track construction and maintenance work. My territory is the Northeast and the New England area. I started out in Ohio, so I'm kind of in familiar territory. So yeah, I manage track construction projects throughout New England and into the Midwest, and it's an exciting career. You get to see a lot of places, meet a lot of people, and at the end of the day, I like seeing old track turn into good-looking track that can sustain, high tonnage, high-speed service. That's what we're about, fueling the American economy.
And we're going to be meeting a lot of people here today as well who are, I'm sure, very excited about what's to come. Rob, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nick.
We're just pulling into Philadelphia's 30th Street Station. The crew's making their final preparations for our guest today. And very different way of experiencing the Northeast Corridor, sitting in a spacious, comfy lounge car, doing 110, passing the cars on the highway. Very good experience. Very good way to start out today's adventure. We're just pulling out of Philadelphia 30th Street Station. We are in the lounge section once again of the Alexander Hamilton, and I am joined by two of our passengers. What are your names and where are you from?
My name is Bill, and this is my wife, Marie.
Marie from Lafayette Hill.
Lafayette Hill, Pennsylvania.
This is right down the street from you practically. What led you to buy a ticket on today's trip?
Well, it was an opportunity to take a long-distance train ride, which I've never done in 71 years. And it was very convenient. We drove to a local commuter train station, which brought us down to 30th Street, so it was no hassle with traffic. It was a great opportunity. Fortunately, the weather's beautiful, and I think we should see a lot of autumn foliage.
What's exciting you most about your adventure today and tomorrow?
Just being on a real old-fashioned train. The last time I rode trains was in the 70s. So.
Back and forth to New York. She used to go to nursing school in New York, so did a lot of back and forth.
Well, today and tomorrow's trip is a slightly longer back and forth then, but Pittsburgh's an excellent destination. What about you? What are you looking forward to on your adventure today and tomorrow?
Well, I'm looking forward to being on a train, which I've wanted to do for all my life, and I think going to Pittsburgh is a great place to go. I've been to Pittsburgh before. It's a beautiful city, and just looking forward to enjoying myself.
Thank you, Bill and Marie. Have a wonderful trip today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm here with Matt, who's a conductor for the Morristown and Erie Railroad, who are the owners of the car that we're riding in today. Matt, what has been your role with organizing and arranging today's trip?
Well, I've been responsible for the mechanical aspect of it and setting up the moves with Amtrak. We work with their private car department, and they set up it's called the PNR, which is the movement request and all that kind of stuff. Aside from doing the day-to-day stuff actually on the trip, I work with our clients, in this case, the American Steam Railroad. Each trip's kind of custom to an extent of what they're going to do on board. So, like for instance, they want to be heavy on food service on this one. So we set up the kitchen for the storage and all that kind of stuff. So we'll take some stuff out that we would use for that would have been used on a day trip, spare tables and stuff like that. We take that out and set it up for more to accommodate food service better. But outside of doing this, I'm responsible for the car in the shop. So when it gets back, we inspect it. Every time we inspect it. Every time before it goes out, we inspect it also, just in case something goes awry. In the shop, we can do anything from changing a brake pad to jacking a car 10 feet up in the air and rolling the trucks out, and kind of a little bit of everything. So.
And I imagine that a piece of historic equipment like this that's being used in extensive operation like this, where it's not just crawling along on a tourist line at 20 miles an hour. We're racing through the Pennsylvania countryside right now at 79. There's a lot to watch for mechanically, and then you work with a lot of customers too, so there's a lot of different requests.
I'll tell you what, it's nerve-wracking sometimes. You're taking something that's older than some of the people that you work with, and you're running at 110 miles an hour. But it's really cool, and they don't build these like they used to. As far as I'm concerned, a Bud-built lightweight car is the pinnacle of what they've ever been able to produce. These will ride better than, I don't want to name any names, but something that's common across the country, that's single level, and the double level ones. But no, you can't beat these. This is as good as it gets, and with age, I think they get better. But of course, there's a lot of things I look out for. But normally, it's wear and tear. And some of these are no different than the diners that Amtrak's still running, or that they weren't running up until recently. This is as good as it gets.
And this seems like an optimal car for use on charters, because you do have the coach seating area, you have the lounge area, so it gives you more range in terms of what can be provided as far as what your customers are looking for.
Yeah, these cars, we in total we operate 9. We're about to add a 10th, which is just a regular coach. 10 cars that the Morristown and Erie operates, in addition to maintaining another, I think we're up to 12 now that are privately owned also on the property. But this car is optimum for this kind of trip, a day trip, where, like you said, you have the lounge in the back where you can go out and hang out and eat and watch the country go by, and with the coach seating, so you have the capacity and the lounge. Whereas, some other cars where you would just have a lounge and the capacity would be limited to, like another car that we have, it's Morris County, has 28 swivel seats in it. So you're kind of limited to just that 28 seats, whereas this, you have 36 coach seats up front, plus the lounge in the back where you fit another 20. But it gives you enough capacity where you could still run a charter like they're doing today, with also still have the lounge space to spread out and hang out and kind of get away from one another.
No, it feels very comfortable. So it feels like it would have been back in 1955, where some passengers would be seating in their coach seats in the other car, and then some would be moving back here for the view or the reading or whatever the case may be. So that there's that element as well. And speaking of the history and the fact that we're on Pennsylvania Railroad home rails with this car, what are your favorite parts of this route and this journey?
Well, I'm always partial to the Northeast Corridor. That's always what I've ridden on. Just about every private car trip I've done, we've been on it at some point, somewhere, where it's going north or south or whatever. This, believe it or not, is the second time I've ever been out west of Philadelphia on the standard railroad of the world. I mean, riding the Pennsy car on Pennsy Iron that's pretty cool, especially considering it's my first time going around a horseshoe curve in Gallitzin, and which is what I'm really looking forward to, is the tunnel and the curve. You couldn't have planned this any better to be in a Pennsy car and Pennsy Iron through one of the most famous routes in the world.
You describe working with Amtrak that they have a private car department, or a department dedicated to these types of moves. From their perspective, what are the things that they're looking for from you in order to make a trip like this happen? What are the hurdles that need to be crossed?
In terms of mechanical or logistics?
Mechanical and logistics.
Every private car has to have an annual inspection. It's called PC1 inspection, where it's in coupler to coupler, top to bottom inspection that is done by a certified Amtrak inspector, certified private car Amtrak inspector. And logistics we have an advantage with the Morristown area is we're our own railroad. So in addition to doing the private car charge and stuff like that, we operate 7 days a week freight service within a refinery and our railroad with track conjunction New Jersey Transit. So if we want to do run our own charter, we drop off our cars to Amtrak ourselves. We don't have to rely on CSX or NS or Amtrak or whatever and kind of line that up. We kind of say, okay, we get it in the books of charter's going to be on Saturday. We'll drop the car off on Thursday, and we drop it off and away it goes. But the people at Amtrak are absolutely fantastic to work with. We never had any issues with them. I have nothing but compliments to say about them.
I spoke recently with Matt Donnelly, who's their lead brand communication specialist. The fact that they're in this period of time right now where they're recognizing their heritage. Later today we'll be passing their fall foliage excursion probably around the Harrisburg area. And I think it's great that they recognize the large demand for people doing these types of trips and that they're willing to accommodate that, especially with these pieces of historic equipment.
I really do think it's great that Amtrak acknowledges its heritage, even though, I mean, a lot of people won't consider Amtrak history. I mean, I do, because everybody says, oh, the golden age of railroading was in the 20s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. I say it's now, because if that was the golden age, it really didn't work out too well for them, because here's Amtrak that took it all over. I think it's great that they acknowledge their heritage, and they still do. It wasn't just like a one-off thing for their 40th anniversary. That the engines that they painted are still running, which I think is cool. You know, anybody who likes trains, I think that's cool. But even just the day-to-day stuff of, you know, they're going back to the thick red, white, and blue window bands on all their equipment with the new baggage cars and the sleepers, which I really think, they call it America's Railroad. I think that's, if you're going to choose anything, that's the look you want to have, and I think it looks great.
And it's great because then we get to enjoy it in so many different ways, whether it be just rail fanning line side or being able to do trips like this. Matt, thank you so much. I hope you have an enjoyable trip.
Thank you. You too.
What's your name and where are you from?
Steve Getz from Malvern, Pennsylvania.
What brings you on board today's trip, Steve?
I've always wanted to take a trip across Pennsylvania on the train and see the Horseshoe Curve, and this was my chance, especially in style.
So this is your first time around Horseshoe Curve then?
Yes, it is. I've seen Horseshoe Curve from the ground, but never on a train.
You're going to have the perfect view of it, being that we're in the observation car, and you can actually see out the back. It's going to be a whole new experience for me too, even though I've done this trip before. So obviously this trip is being done as a fundraiser for the American Steam Railroad and the Fire Up 2100 campaign. What is most exciting to you about following the progress of that restoration and how this is going to contribute to that?
I've always liked steam. I come from an area not in the coal region, but close enough to it, eastern Pennsylvania. Reading was always a big part of the Philadelphia area, and just has my attention.
What's been the favorite thing that you've seen trackside so far? And we've passed heritage units, we've passed beautiful scenery. What have you enjoyed up to this point?
Oh, it's hard to say. So far, a lot of good things. The yards near Harrisburg, the bridge near the steel mills in Coatesville. Just seeing a lot of things that I've seen from the road, but it's a totally different view from the train. And then, as I said, I'm looking forward to the Altoona area quite a bit.
Now, have you done any other private car trips before this one, or is this your first private car trip as well?
This is actually my second. I had done one out in California. It was on the back of the Zephyr from just outside San Francisco back to Denver. Although for that trip it was the temperature was well over 100 degrees, so the train had to be slow, and we were, 10 hours late or something, because they were worried about kinks in the rails and stuff. But it was that was a good trip. That was an overnight trip on board the train.
And so this trip today is a two-part adventure where we're heading to Pittsburgh, the Steel City, and then we're going to make it back. And it's been exciting too, because we've seen quite a few rail fans trackside, because besides our trip, there was also the fall foliage Amtrak excursion that was going out. I always find it feels like a celebrity when you're on these special trips and you see tons of rail fans out and about taking photos. You get that feeling?
Yeah, because everybody's looking at the train and we're waving back at them and they're waving at us. Yeah, you feel a little special.
But at the same time, being on board, it's just such a nice return to form in a way. Being in a lounge car on a mainline trip, it's very unique.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's so relaxing. The windows are better. Not that Amtrak's bad, but the windows on this train are wide open. You don't feel closed in at all. Very comfortable ride. It rides better than Amtrak cars. It's just, yeah, I wish I could do it more often. You always wonder that if someday there won't be quite as many of these trips, just like steam engines are getting a little rarer and a little bit rarer. I don't want to let too many of them pass by.
You tell me that you're involved with live steam as well, 1/8 scale, and I've always been impressed by the level of detail that people put into their locomotives. How did you get into that part of the hobby, and what are some of the locomotives in your stable?
I think originally I wanted to teach myself machining, and I've always liked steam locomotives, so I think it got me going. I said, okay, I'm going to build one. And I spent, for the first engine was a 260 steamer, and it took me 13 years to build that one as I learned and came up with the money and et cetera, et cetera. And then just about 2 years ago, I also built an electric box cab interurban engine. It's a little easier to haul around the cabs to sites and do. Steam requires a lot of stuff to be hauled along with you.
Right, because there's the design of the boiler and getting all of the particulars right with something that's far less easy to control than just electrical signals with a box cab.
Yeah, the electric box cab's very easy, and then you turn it on, you turn the knob, you go. Even braking, unless you're on a very steep railroad, you do braking through the same motors as you accelerate through. So that's very easy. The steam, there's a lot of things to handle, and just traveling wherever you're going, there's a lot of junk you have to take along with you. Not just coal, lubricating materials, a lot of tools. Steam engines are a little more cantankerous.
Just like the real thing.
Yes, exactly.
You modeled a 260. Was it based on any prototype with a specific railroad?
It was based on a Baldwin locomotive engine, 260. It looks a lot like Strasbourg number 90 with less drivers.
Live stream's an interesting part of the hobby, which I definitely want to explore more of on the show, because I feel like people go so far with it, and the models that people build of big boys or Pennsylvania Railroad T1s, the level of detail that they get out of them, it's just astounding. 13 years. What was the process in that 13 years as far as the design and the construction of it and figuring it all out, so to speak?
I guess during those 13 years, it was a combination of learning the machine, acquiring equipment, coming up with the money for even just the raw materials. And there was a lot of sitting around just looking at things saying, how do I approach this? How am I going to machine this? How is this going to go together in the big scheme? And it was just enjoyable. Now, also during 13 years, there was a couple years in there. I've had some little kids, and I probably didn't work on it as much as I did the other years. But yeah, it was quite a challenge. The electric locomotive, I did in 1 year. And the difference between them was in the U.S. there's, for the 1/8 scale, there's two different gauges, one 7 1/4 and one 7 1/2, which has caused a problem that you can't run one on the other. So my steam locomotive was 7 1/4, and I decided I needed something for 7 1/2, and that's why I built the electric. And it was something I could whip out over a long winter.
So do you have some future projects lined up, steam, electric, or otherwise?
Nothing big, a lot of little things, and that's what you talk about, the detail. There's a lot. After you have these, there's a lot of little projects, little add-ons, little modifications you do. So I've been in the process just recently of doing a lot on the electric box cab. But the steam engine, yes, once in a while it's like, oh, that could be a little better, or what can I do for this? The lighting could be a little better, whatever. So there's always something to do on them.
Certainly a lot of fun to tinker with.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I hope you enjoy the rest of your ride today and your return trip tomorrow.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we're about to go out onto the vestibule. Stick our head out the window. Ready? Okay, here we go. So here we are, out on the vestibule of the Alexander Hamilton. We've got an NS intermodal train passing us. I kind of feel like a dog. I have the strong urge to stick my tongue out doing that. That's something that you can't ordinarily do on Amtrak. So what is your name and where are you from?
Donna, and I'm from Cape May, New Jersey.
Cape May, very lovely country.
Point of New Jersey. Yep.
Very lovely country down there.
Absolutely, very
So how did you find out about today's trip and what brings you here?
This was a gift from my husband for my birthday, so it was a surprise. And it was so cool. It's just very cool. I think it was something that we had talked about, taking a train across the United States, and actually they were talking about doing that. So it was like, this is like a beginning of a starting point to see if we'd enjoy it.
Well, happy birthday, and this is certainly a great introduction to that. You couldn't do better on the weather and the view and the history with this line.
The colors are tremendous. The fall colors are just beautiful.
What'd you think about going around Horseshoe Curve?
That was amazing. It was such a cool view. Never seen anything like it. It was really very cool. Very cool. Yeah.
It's fun to see the people down there waving back at you too.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like people all along this trip have been waiting for the train to come by. So that's kind of exciting to see all the people that came out looking for the train. So very neat. Good stuff.
And as you probably know, this trip is fundraising for the American Steam Railroad and their restoration of 2100. Are you a particular fan of steam locomotives?
Well, not until now, but now I am. Yeah, I wasn't before, but now I am. This was an amazing trip and a very, very good way to start this kind of adventure.
Do you think about this cross-country rail trip you want to do? You're going to do an Amtrak, or you're going to do it by a private car like this?
Boy, I think the private car, if you guys pull it together, that's what I want to be on. I want to be on the private car. This is a lot of fun. This is nice. Everything was perfect. You guys pulled it off great.
Well, kudos to Luxury Rail Travel, the organizers of this trip, for working out all the details and making this happen.
Very good job. They have it down. All good.
So what have been some of your other favorite train travels that you have done?
Nothing like this. I've never done anything like this. Never. Yeah, this is unique.
So besides Horseshoe Curve and the occasional passing intermodal train like we have right now, what have been some of the other highlights of the trip that you've really enjoyed?
Going over the bridge, the river, the wide open views of the river was pretty spectacular. The fall colors, the leaves, all the countryside is beautiful. Lancaster from train is a very pretty area, so yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Donna. You have a good trip.
I did. Thank you so much.
We are currently vestibule riding at 79 miles an hour. I can't stick my head out anymore. The ballast is being kicked up. Man, what a feeling. Wind rushing your face. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. What's your name and where are you from?
I'm Tom Hill from McKenna, Florida, just outside of Jacksonville.
We're just pulling into Pittsburgh now, Tom. How have you enjoyed the first half of your adventure?
This has been absolutely fabulous. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. This is a beautiful car to ride. The crew has taken unbelievably good care of us.
All the way from Florida. That's quite a trek to come up to here. What brought you from such a distance? Why coming to here and this trip specifically?
The young lady sitting alongside of you is the one that made the decision on this trip. She wanted to see fall colors, and when her eyes sparkled that way, who could turn her down?
Excellent. Well, that seems like as good a reason as any. So what was your favorite part of your trip today?
Oh, very definitely for me, in addition to seeing the car, is visiting with the people. It's always wonderful under these kinds of circumstances to be able to sit and talk at length with people that otherwise you'd never have a chance to even know.
That's true. And being in a car like this, it invites conversation in a way that the typical cars that we get to ride in on mainline passenger trains don't. So that definitely does make a difference. What are you most excited about with your return trip now that you've experienced the Pittsburgh line?
Well, I get to see the backside of everything I saw the front side of today. But once again, we've lost quite a bit of time in darkness, and I hope to see some of it in daylight so I can take a few more pictures at this west end of the line.
That's going to be really good. Tom, thank you so much for joining us on the Roundhouse. I'm glad you've had such a good adventure today.
I'm sure glad you were along with us. I've enjoyed watching your work.
Thank you very much. After the interview with Tom, he started talking about his career with Amtrak. So I quickly turned my recorder on, but it cut off the question where I asked him what he did.
I was in the process of building and running an FM radio station in the 1960s when I started this, and my time was tied up. I was working 16, 17 hours a lot of days. I did morning news. During the midday, I went out and did the technical work on the transmitter, and then I signed the station off at 10 o'clock at night when I didn't have a city council or a school board meeting to go to and cover. So it was an interesting life, but somebody came along and had more money than I'd ever seen and bought the radio station away from me. So I decided to spend the rest of my life playing with trains, and she had no idea what she was doing when she said yes to that kind of concept.
But isn't it so much fun to be playing with trains?
It is absolutely fabulous, and Amtrak is the only company I have ever known that would give you a $10 million train set and send you out and tell you to run it and not even send a supervisor along to see what you were doing.
They hid in the weeds to clock the time.
Oh yeah, you had all of that, and yes, you had to be all certified before you did any of it. But for 30 years, I got to run these trains, and it was the most fabulous thing on the face of the earth. Or, as I told everybody, my interest stops at the center line of the knuckle on the back locomotive. The cars behind, that was the conductor's problem. These chunks of metal up here, they're mine.
So you were an Amtrak engineer?
I was an Amtrak engineer, yes.
Wow.
I didn't know it was going to happen that way. My father bought a business car, and I helped him bring it home. One of the things I had to do was ride a freight train across Wisconsin in order to get in place, because Amtrak was brand new and the railroads were scared to death of having people riding on cars that didn't belong there. So my father took a school bus of family and friends up to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I went up and parked a car at Winona, Minnesota. And so when they got across the state, we had a vehicle to take people back south in. And I still have in my possession the train order that was issued to the engine crew of the Green Bay and Western at Winona, Minnesota. It said to hold the train until 6:30 a.m. for Thomas A. Hill.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's really nifty.
When we rolled into Green Bay about 12 hours later, the operator called on the radio and asked the engineer where Mr. Hill was, and he says he's on the head end. And she says, well, if you'll pull him down to Route so-and-so, Mr. Knutson will be there to pick him up. And they had the superintendent of the railroad sitting in a company car to pick me up. And he says, well, Mr. Hill, I'm going to take you to supper, but then you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want to ride your father's car, or sleep in your father's car tonight? Or do you want to sleep in the new 1776 that we just built that's going to be the replacement business car? Didn't take me long to make a decision. I said, I'll be able to sleep tomorrow night on that car going across Wisconsin. I'll stay in the 1776 tonight.
There you go. Best of both worlds.
Yeah. I've been the luckiest little kid you've ever seen, and I refuse to grow up.
I'm here now back at the studio, so to speak, with Russ Swinnerton, who is the president of Luxury Rail Travel. Russ, reflecting on your journey and how everything went, how do you feel about this milestone for your company?
Well, Nick, I think it went pretty well. I've been doing trips for a while for other people. This was my first for my own company, and I think that 99% of it went exactly as we planned. There was just a couple of minor things that didn't quite go as we planned, but so minor that most people didn't notice. You know, if that's all that went wrong, that's a pretty good thing. A lot of these trips, especially as they get larger and more involved, there's a lot more moving parts and a lot more other entities that you have to rely on for transportation or for moving cars or repairing things. So they get pretty complicated. So the couple minor things that we had weren't really that big a thing. You know, we ran out of wine, I think was the worst thing that happened. So that's not too bad.
When was your first mainline private car experience?
Well, my first mainline private experience was back in the 90s. I was actually involved with the Lancaster chapter NRHS trips, and I was involved in their food service cars, and I love doing it. I love riding trains, And I especially love riding special trains, that you're not really kind of supposed to be there, but it's a special thing. So, you get to do it. So that was a good time. In the late 2000s, I set one up with another gentleman for the Conrail Historical Society. And that was my first full-blown, I believe it was an 18-car train that we did when we did the Conrail Express out of Philadelphia. We did okay. We had a couple issues, and the one after that, which we did out of Washington, that was completely my baby with some minor help from a couple other folks. And that one we did very, very well on. And so, it kind of went from there. But yeah, I've been doing them since the late 1990s in one capacity or another.
What is luxury rail travel? Provide us an overview of the services and work that your company does.
Luxury rail travel, I started mostly to do private car trips, and I do private car trips both for myself in that I sell the trip, I collect all the money, and I set everything up and, everything like that. We also do private car trips for other entities. The Steel City Limited was for the American Steam Railroad Preservation Association. They actually contracted with me to run the trip for them, and whatever was made from the ticket sales went to the restoration of 2100. Luxury rail travel, I'm also working to branch out into some other areas, and one of the things that I'm looking to do is actually to do some international trips. And the one that I'm working on right now is actually going to be a 2-week English steam trip. I'm lucky enough that my parents live over there, and I've got some ins with some preserved railways over there. I'm able to get some pretty interesting tours that most people aren't able to get. So I'm really hoping I can pull that together for 2018. The other aspect of luxury rail travel that I haven't really explored yet, but I'm looking to do, is domestic rail fan trips. And that would be, you get a few people lined up to go out to somewhere like Cajon Pass and Tehachapi Loop, or somewhere like that, and go out and explore that a little bit. But at the moment, it's 99% the private car trips.
The private car trips seem to be an interesting base too. I think for a lot of rail fans, the extent of what they see with a private car trip is just, oh, there's a private car in the back of this train, or there's a private car traveling on a normally freight railroad. Provide us a little bit more insight in terms of what are the logistics and planning that goes into making a trip such as the Steel City Limited happen.
Well, there's a lot. The Steel City Limited actually started the planning stages in January of this year. One of the first things that happened, of course, was Steve Harvey, the president of the American Steam Railroad Preservation Group, got a hold of me and said, hey, we heard you set up this business and, would you like to put on a private car trip for us? And I said, yeah, sure. From there, it's a matter of finding the appropriate private car for the trip and searching through the different databases of private cars that are available. Once you find the car, you've got to make sure that it's available for the weekend or the time period that you want, what the price is, how to get to where your beginning point is, all that kind of stuff. And then once you get the big framework set up, the car, the locations, and everything like that, you go back through and you say, okay, now it's time to work on how are the customers going to get on the train? How are they going to get off the train? When they get off the train, how are they going to get to the hotel? Setting up the hotel, traveling out to the hotel to make sure that it's as advertised and it's worthy of being used. And you go through all of that stuff, and then when you're done with all of that, then you go back through and you plan the smaller stuff, and that is the meals, how you're going to cook them, where you're going to cook them, the drink service, the other food service, and things like that. And you go through all of that, and then you go back through again, and you start putting in the even smaller parts, and that's things like on this particular trip, we kind of had a Pennsylvania-based theme because we ran, the whole trip through Pennsylvania. And we included things like food that was made locally. The wine and beer on the trip was sourced locally. Everybody got a goodie bag with some Hershey miniatures in it, information about the local area. And once you get all of that done, you put together a price, present it to the customer. Customer yay or nays it. And then we work with a company called WhistleTix to actually handle our ticket sales for us, because they're very much like Ticketmaster in that they can handle large volume ticket sales and phone calls and things where I couldn't do that on my own. And then once all that's set up, then we go back, we submit everything to Amtrak for the final approvals, and we sign all our contracts with Amtrak, with the car owner, which in the Steel City Limited's case was the Morristown and Erie Railway. And we signed the contract with the Marriott Hotel in Pittsburgh and got all that done and got all the checks dispersed and everything else. And then from that point, we did a test cook on the food to make sure that we could make the food in the appropriate amount of time and that it would taste good. We went out and we put the car through its paces on the Morristown and Erie. And at that point, you're basically ready to go. It's just fine-tuning things with Amtrak as far as boarding procedures, things like that, and making sure that the passengers know where to go, they know where to get on the car. From that point on, it's just take care of the customer and give them the experience that they paid for.
Man, that is an incredible amount of detail. And there's some things you're describing in there that I wouldn't have even thought of, like testing the time to make sure that you can serve people in the appropriate amount of time. Now, I think that's a sign of a good quality experience is when to your audience or your passengers, it seems seamless, but you know the amount of effort and connecting the dots you've had to put in to make it work. The part of what I'm curious about too is, on average, when you look at the trips you've been part of, that you've organized, or that you've seen other organizers put on, who are the groups and people that are chartering cars? Are we talking largely rail fans, or is there a significant non-rail fan population, Hollywood movie stars? What's the kind of demographics it's hitting upon here?
A lot of the private car stuff that I've seen has been groups like NRHS groups or historical societies, things like that. They'll charter a car and take a trip, such as the New River trains down south and things like that. But there are a lot of people who will say, hey, we're having this family reunion. Let's charter a train, let's charter a private car and go to the family reunion. Or, you know, we've always wanted to do this and it's just a group of rail fan friends or something like that. I've actually been contacted by a group like that that just said, hey, you know, we're 20 guys that we just thought it'd be really neat to do this and what would it cost? And I send them the information and they're deciding whether or not they want to do it. But all kinds of people lease private cars. Whether it's, like you said, like someone who's fairly well-to-do, they want a business car or something like that, or a historical group, or just a group of guys that want to go out for the weekend and do something different.
When you're able to step back for a moment and have a break and take in the work that you're doing, what about traveling on these cars is most enjoyable for you?
I think a lot of it is being able to share what I like with the general public. And what I really like is I like being in this car that not everybody gets to ride in. I mean, you can go ride on an Amfleet car from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. And yeah, it's interesting because you're riding the train and that kind of thing. But when you're able to ride in a car that doesn't get out there very much, it's kind of a special experience, because as you go by all these people sitting trackside, and as you said, the Autumn Express was going the same day, so there was a lot more people than usual. But going by these people and watching their heads turn as you go by, I mean, that's great. I love that. And I actually got a very short chance when we were going through Lewistown on the way back to open up the Dutch door and lean out and give everybody a wave at the station. And a lot of people were going, hey, look at that. That's not an Amfleet car. Look at that. That's neat. We actually got some really great videos from people along the route. I think that's what I enjoy the most.
I'm sure, too, that now that you're the head of this company and you're mapping out what the future could look like, both in terms of where you want to go with the company, the types of experiences you want to offer, but also the types of trips you want to do, the possibilities, I'm sure, are endless. But what are those that are exciting you the most as you think about what you could do?
There's always somewhere new to go. Unfortunately, we have to exist within Amtrak's private car regulations, so there's only certain places we can add or take off cars. But one of the trips that I've been kind of toying around with American Steam and going back and forth on them is actually doing an around the country trip, leaving out of New York, going to Chicago, and then taking the train down to LA, riding up the coastline where the track is right next to the beach, up to Seattle, and then coming back on the Empire Builder to Chicago and then back to New York again. And I think that trip really, really excites me. I can imagine the Dutch door being open, going through the desert, just having that hot air hitting your face. It's something really neat. And then, of course, going up the coastline with literally the track, the rock, and then the sand and the water. It's just the most amazing ride going up there. And I'm really excited about doing that trip.
I think what will be exciting as well is to see what can be done in the future to make these types of trips more easily accessible to more people. Obviously, there's a ton of costs associated with these trips, whether it be insurance and Amtrak and car movements and all these kind of things, which you can't really reduce it because they just kind of are what they are. But what can be done potentially in the future to have subsidized trips so that the costs are what they are, but more people who wouldn't ordinarily be able to have the private rail car experience get to have that, even if it's just a short day trip, something that could mean a lot just because of being able to travel on a historical car. It's just something that I left the Steel City Limited and I thought to myself, I'm definitely glad that I'm sharing this with people through the Roundhouse, but I hope that the future provides even more ways of getting people to have this experience firsthand.
Well, we definitely want people to have the experience. I mean, even if it's not the full-blown Steel City Limited type experience, that trip, the ticket was $750, and I know that a lot of people just don't have it in their budget for $750 for a train ride. And one of the things that I did with that trip that I'm really actually glad I did was I offered riders the ability to ride from Philadelphia to New York on the deadhead move, because we deadheaded the car from Philadelphia back to New York City because it lives near there. And I sold those tickets for $120 a piece. And that's generally pretty affordable. So people who wouldn't normally be able to do that got a chance to ride. I also use them as a promo to promote my company. I did that with the Roundhouse and a friend of mine who runs the Altoona Works Facebook page. And that worked out pretty well. I mean, a couple of those people rode along, and one of them actually bought 4 more tickets for the rest of his family. They came along, and everybody had a nice ride, and, it gave them a chance to experience the private car experience without paying the private car price tag.
Yes, I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to donate tickets for listeners of our show who responded to a survey that we put out there, just trying to get a sense of what you guys enjoy about the show, because it was just fantastic to be able to offer that as an incentive. I look forward to seeing how you'll be able to incorporate that with future trips as well. I think that's a great way of starting that off. And certainly it seems like you're describing this, both the Montreal trip and the UK trip sound absolutely phenomenal. And I can't wait to see what more of the specific details come out of your planning for that.
Yeah, we're looking to the Montreal trip and next year's Steel City Limited. We're looking to launch the information for that before Christmas so that we can sell tickets as Christmas presents. So the Steel City Limited trip for next year, we've extended the trip by a day, so we're going to be spending a full day in Pittsburgh. And also the Montreal trip is going to be a 5-day trip. And we go up on the train one day, 3 days in Montreal in a hotel there, and then a day coming back to New York City. So that'll be a good trip also.
Definitely. One last question for you is that you mentioned that earlier you're somewhat limited when you do these private car trip plannings based on Amtrak's network. But let's remove that from the equation for 1 second. Let's put some of those logistics aside and say that if you could plan a trip with any railroad giving you permission, with any equipment at your disposal, with any time frame, what would that trip be? What would that look like?
Wow, that's quite the question. I would probably do something on CSX because there's a lot of neat stuff down there that people don't ever get to see because CSX isn't really interested in hosting any kind of excursion. I know Harper's Ferry is one spot that's been very, very popular, or running down through the eastern seaboard down to Florida would be great. If it were up to me, I would do it with dome cars because nothing beats the experience of a dome car. And unfortunately, in the Northeast, we can't do that. And a lot of trains that originate in the Northeast, we can't do that. That would be it. Would be like the sort of the Southeast U.S. with dome cars, and I just think that would be great.
And you never know what kind of opportunities will come around the bend. It's been great that Amtrak has been so accommodating to private car operators such as yourself to be able to make any trips happen. So who knows what the future will entail? It's always exciting to see.
That's exactly right. And Amtrak is very, very good to work with. They are just wonderful people there. And you can tell a lot of them really love the trains and what they do. So I can always give big props to Amtrak.
And props to yourself for pulling off an amazing adventure. Russ, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for inviting us to cover that trip, experience it, and get to share the experience with the rest of us here. Much appreciated. It was quite a blast.
You're welcome, Nick, anytime. And thank you for doing what you do with the Roundhouse podcast and getting the word out on things that people may not know about or may not have even thought to experience. I mean, I've listened to every Roundhouse podcast you've put out, and I just think it's a great show. And I'm glad that we can bring private car information to your listeners. And I always look forward to when the next one comes out.
Now you can look forward to it even more because it'll be you. Russ, thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words. And the Roundhouse is our house. That's why we do this. We like having listeners on the show sharing what they do. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Nick.
What a fantastic adventure that was. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. There's plenty of photos from the adventure on the roundhousepodcast.com, the show notes for episode 49. You can check them out there. It was a blast, and I enjoyed taking you guys along for the ride.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we took a cab ride aboard Nickel Plate 765, and I asked you guys what your cab ride experiences were. This from Jason Leach. The steam locomotive I had a cab ride in is a locomotive that is very near and dear to me, former Santa Fe 484 Northern 3751. A friend and I got invited to ride in the cab with the crew on a part of her 2013 excursion from Los Angeles to San Bernardino to attend the 2013 San Bernardino Railroad Days Festival. The crew let us take all the pictures we wanted. It was an unforgettable experience. And this from Nick Chilianis. In 1987, I rode the very last run of the pre-National Park Service Steamtown Foundation and the cab of Canadian National 3254. I purchased a cab pass for $50 and signed a waiver holding the Steamtown Foundation harmless in the event that something went wrong. That old Mike is a pretty rough rider, even at the low speeds that Steamtown operates her. Very good stories, and there were a lot more that you guys left on the roundhousepodcast.com that I enjoyed reading. Your question of the day for this episode is, share your experience aboard a private rail car or where you would want to travel on one. Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. Links to social media there. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. You can keep up to date with everything we're doing and what future adventures will be going on together. I want to thank you guys for all of your support. We're coming up on episode 50, and it means so much to me that you guys have been there to support and help the show to grow so that we get to do cool stuff like this. Remember that the Roundhouse is our house.